Do you like all things considered bows, long bows, short bows, and the like? Well, good, because I've got a build centered around exactly those. If you find yourself new to the channel, please understand that my builds are one thing. That one thing are one-trick ponies. I find what I like about them, and then I make that one thing hit as hard as I possibly can. Whatever happens to the build after that does not matter, but as long as it hits as hard as I can get it to do, then I am happy. With that said, let's go ahead and go over the actual build. First and foremost, some things I want to go over is the fact that it's going to be a Greatbow build. Yes, a Greatbow. That means it's all ranged, no melee, and surprisingly, it's going to be all strength. There really isn't any focus on any status effects, so we don't have to pump any points into arcane, and dexterity doesn't need to be leveled up as much because we do get better scaling with strength. If you'd very much prefer to just see what the build looks like, here's a screenshot of everything that I'm wearing and what my stats look like. Pause it if you'd like, and you can stop right here, otherwise I'm going to go ahead and continue with the video. The single most important part of this build is going to be the Golem Greatbow. Reason being is because it's got the highest scaling for strength, and it's also got the highest damage. So when you're looking for a bow that's just going to do absolute chunks of damage to the boss, you're going to be looking towards this one. I have tried giving double Radon bows a try, and it's kind of a cool gimmick concept, but not enough bosses let you hit all 10 arrows. It's a lot of damage, sure, but hitting every arrow from Radon's rain is super tough considering a lot of the bosses don't stand still long enough for all 10 to hit. Our offhand weapon that sits on our back 24/7 when we aren't buffing is going to be the Lion's Greatbow. I know I just said it doesn't do damage, and that's right, we're not using it for damage. We're using it as a buff weapon, much like we use the Highland Axe for war attacks. What we're using this weapon for specifically is going to be Radon's Spears. Radon's Spears get another 20% damage bonus just for having the Lion's Greatbow. So that means these three items will be the most important part of this build. They will put out the most damage you can possibly get from any Greatbow when you put these together. Going over our buff weapons, we'll be using the Commander Standard as our aura buff when we use the Railing Standard for another 20% damage. Immediately following that is once again going to be a self-stabbing cane sword. Yes, the Shotel is lighter by about a pound, but for aesthetics purposes, we are using the cane sword. It just looks better when you stab yourself. And finally, finishing things off is going to be the finger seal. In a perfect world, we don't need this, but for consistency's sake, we're using this with Flame Grant Me Strength. And we're using the finger seal specifically because we don't need the claw mark seal. We're not doing damage with any kind of incantations, so we don't need any kind of extra incant scaling through our strength. Static buffs like Flame Grant Me Strength will not get any added anything just for having extra incantation scaling. Anyway, moving on to our armor, which the first piece you can probably already guess is going to be the White Mask. Yes, because we're using our Seppuku sword, we're going to be using White Mask for another 10% damage just for having blood loss nearby. My second and only other piece of armor is going to be the Snow Witch robe. Don't really have any space for anything else, and this one just kind of covers up every other part of my body that's disgustingly out. So I went for this. Moving on to our talismans, which are just as easy as always. Firstly, the Shard of Alexander. We're using this just so we can buff up through and through. Our next most important talisman is going to be the Arrow Sting talisman. We need this because yes, Radon's Spear, despite its name, is absolutely an arrow, so this will buff that damage. Unnaturally and specifically for the purpose of boosting our damage, we do have the Lord of Blood's Exaltation. It's not really something you always want to see, you know, having to utilize blood loss just to boost our damage to the maximum, but this is how we're doing it, this is how I'm doing it, and that's why this is here. And finally, closing off our talismans is the Great Jar's Arsenal. We need the weight limit, we have 0 weight left when we put everything together, and this just helps us not be heavy rolling. We don't like heavy rolling, we prefer medium rolling, so we're going to be using this. Now, we can talk about our stats, once again geared for rune level 150. Starting things off, we have our Vigor, which is going to be at 50. Nets us about 1700 health, which is enough for a ranged build, right? Next is our Mind at 28, which you could argue you could take this down to like 24, 25, and put the rest of those points into Endurance, or bump up your Vigor a little bit more. You don't really need this much Mind, it's just I don't feel like chugging, you know, blue potions all that often, so I did that. Endurance is at 20, and like I said, you can take points out of Mind, and you can put them here. Strength is at a whopping 80. Could take it to 60, but what's the point of going to 60 when you could just push it to 80, get the two-handed modifier, and get way more damage? Dexterity is at 20, which may seem a tiny bit low, but we're using a Greatbow. The Greatbow has way better scaling with strength, so there's no point in really dumping a whole lot of points into dexterity when you're just going to get better scaling from strength. Our intelligence, untouched. Our arcane, untouched, but our faith, we bumped up 3 points just so we could use Flame Grant Me Strength. There's two more things that I want to talk about before this ends, and the first one is the physic. I mean, I've got the Opaline Hard tier and the Stone Barb Cracked tier. Don't really need the Stone Barb. You could go for like the healing one, the stamina regen. You could go for really anything there, but you don't need the crack tier. And the only other item that I have yet to actually talk about is the Blood Bowl Aromatic. Yes, you should absolutely use this when you want to do the most amount of damage. Flame Grant Strength is only 20%, this is 30%. You could use the Exalted Flesh for 20% and not put any points into Faith, but I just thought it'd look cooler to have points into Faith and be able to smack fire onto myself to do more damage. I mean, that's just me, you know? That's gonna pretty much wrap up this video. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. If not, say something down in the comments of why you hated it.